All
great.
right. Well, my first Substack Live, so thank you for being my first
Uh,
Substack Live guest.
I'm honored to be with the legend, man. With I feel I watched your reporting. You know, it's interesting. I just got back from Tennessee. Was it yesterday? I was in Kentucky for a bourbon dinner with the Van Winkles for charity. And so I was just in Tennessee, Kentucky to Tennessee. So I was at Watauga Lake, and it was just incredible.
Well, I am new to becoming a connoisseur of bourbon, so we'll have to get together and you can educate me.
I can help you on Silverback, on our bourbon. I can help you on all this, my friend.
Well, while people are joining us, one of the things I often get accused of, and just by way of introduction, Denver Riggleman, former GOP congressman, a staff member for the J6 committee, and one of the things I often get accused of is platforming bleeding heart liberals. You are certainly not a bleeding heart liberal, although you may have been called that a time or two.
Oh, buddy, I have been called every name from the right and the left, from the tool of the Antichrist to being secretly funded by George Soros by the far right. The far left has accused me of being secretly funded by Heritage Foundation. So, Phil, I am far from anybody who would identify as a bleeding heart liberal, as a former Republican congressman from Virginia, my friend.
Yeah, and I just got around, unfortunately, to reading your book, "The Breach," which came out in 22, and that's part of the foundational story that you tell there. That you come from a very conservative family, as do I. Represented a conservative part of the country. You were a member of the House Freedom Caucus, and did you ever imagine that you would find yourself in this situation?
You know, Phil, it's such an incredible story. When I ran in Virginia's 5th District, I remember my consultant saying, if you're not a member of the Freedom Caucus, you're not going to win. And it was just bizarre convention. I'd never run before. And by saying that I would consider to be a member of the Freedom Caucus, I won my convention by one vote. And I remember my first meeting in the Freedom Caucus was Louis Comer talking about a one world algorithm to destroy conservatives, which was my first real rift with the Freedom Caucus. Like, that's not a thing. I worked in the National Security Agency. But yeah, I mean, being a Republican in Virginia is pretty interesting. It's you're down the line, and after about a year, I wasn't down the line anymore. I really have to tell you, bud, I thought there was a chance to be a new Republican, and I am center right, and I probably a lot of people are like, Denver will never be a Democrat. Well, I'm certainly can never be a Republican again. So I'm really solidly independent right now, Phil.
Yeah, one of the reasons I really wanted to speak with you after reading The Breach is that, kind of the underlying thesis of my Hate Comes to Main Street publication is that if you really want to understand what's happening in the country today, you have to understand the overlap between white supremacy, Christian nationalism, and QAnon conspiracy theories. In fact, my working theory is that they have fed off of each other so much that they've almost become, instead of a Venn diagram, they've almost become a circle. Do you agree, disagree with that?
No, it's funny you said QAnon. QAnon, I think, is like like a sticky bomb of conspiracy theories. They just globbed it all together and throw it on your tire like Saving Private Ryan. But QAnon is certainly an anti-Semitic-based Christian nationalist conspiracy umbrella. If you're talking everything from Save Our Children hashtag, all the way to adrenochrome, but all the way to the stolen election conspiracy theories, all of that is QAnon-based or QAnon adjacent. But when you're talking about Christian nationalism and the New Apostolic Reformation, the NAR, as you're very well aware of, Phil, all of it is one big conglomerate of mess. And I think the one thing about January 6th, I think that we have to go back and readdress, and it should have been mentioned more in the actual January 6th report, was the pervasive Christian nationalist, white nationalist flavor of the January 6th insurrection and the coup attempt. And I think that's something that we still haven't really gotten our arms around, that and the radicalization of the military individuals who are in the crowd, Phil. So yes, buddy, listen, Phil, I've watched your stuff. especially what you've done in trying to track down these conspiracy theorists and law enforcement. Some of the things you do are so brave. And I think your question is just right on the head, is that we have a real issue with the weaponization of Christian and white nationalism in this country. And all of that is really based on a very, I would say, sordid bit of evangelicalism that's sort of, I would say, metastasized across the United States through social media or through prosperity gospel stuff or whatever you want to call it. I think, obviously, January 6th was all of that.
I often hear from people, especially people in the Tennessee area where I live and work, that our problems today in this country are not Republican or Democrat. Both sides are equally involved. What is your answer to that?
Phil, crazy is not party specific, but I will tell you that the far right's in a hold my beer moment. How about that? And I think we can talk about other conspiracy theories. I think we can talk about all the things that I try to attack to stop, right? To sort of kill it before it actually sprouts from the soil, like the far left talking about the 2024 stolen election conspiracy theories and the faked assassination conspiracy theories. The problem that you have, though, is that the far right has weaponized us in a way we've never seen. And I don't see people from the left storming the Capitol because of the 2024 stolen election theory. There's this fine line where the far right is willing to weaponize or willing to execute their plan in a way that the left just won't. And I think that's something we have to be really aware of, is that, yes, we can say that there's issues on the far left and far right. That's absolutely true. No problem. That's absolutely, I can show you the data. We can show you the data on violence, on reciprocal violence. But the far right really has taken it to another level, especially with radicalization, especially the fact that it comes from the president of the United States. We have a party leader who's an inveterate liar, who feeds into the Christian nationalist mythos. And I think that's the issue that we have, buddy, is that, yes, everybody can call the fringes crazy and say it's the left and the right, but the right is in a specifically dangerous place right now. And I think we just have to come to grips with that.
And you have, in that case, the fringe that has taken over one party.
Yeah, it's the worst of the right owns the right. I don't think the worst of the left owns the left. It's just that simple.
Taking a look at the book, you talk about having been one of the earliest and loudest critics of QAnon dogma and other increasingly violent and frankly unhinged far-right rhetoric. I became convinced this apocalyptic, excuse me, I was reading ahead, ideology was akin to a cult, that social media was spreading it like a digital virus, and it posed an existential threat to our republic. I had the experience in the past week of, I did a post on Hate Comes to Main Street about how white nationalist groups were looking at the riots in Belfast and saying, here's what we can learn from the techniques that are being used to attack innocent immigrants in Belfast. And I posted that on Facebook, and I was absolutely inundated. 9,000 negative comments. And where I would think, okay, we all should agree on the fact that we shouldn't be attacking innocent people. But I was hit with 9,000 negative comments, and I was like, where is this coming from? Is this an algorithm? Is this a bot attack? How does that type of thing affect our discourse from your experience? Because you have experience in intelligence.
I do. And really, and how to shape information warfare and influence operations. When you see 9,000 negative comments like that, most of that's influence operations. It could be domestic. There can be some foreign elements in there. You have people who have bots. I mean, it's not that hard to do. And so a lot of times I think when people, and I think you were on X, Phil, when you put that up there, right? That was on X?
That was on Facebook that I was really.
Oh, that was on Facebook. Same thing. Facebook is certainly likes to lean to the right. I'm Gen X, and I think I think there's a lot of Gen X far right leaners that seem to be, Facebook seems to be their platform of choice. And even if you look at what happened with QAnon coordination, and a lot of that happened on Facebook private chats, in private rooms. I mean, we just know that now. So I think what you're saying is really coordinated influence operations, right? When you put out something, Phil, and Phil, you're obviously a target, right? You've done some incredible pieces. You're an award winner. You're very thorough. You're a facts-based journalist who's not easily intimidated, which, boy, hats off to you, my friend. I think everybody here should be a fan of Phil. I got to tell you that. I'm a fan. I'm a Phil guy. But I do think that you're a target. So when they coordinate like that, it's really just bot and influence farming coordination. It's really algorithmic warfare. That's what it is, buddy. And that's sadly is what you were a victim of.
And you mentioned that J6 you hoped would be a wake up call to the fact that we are now in an information war. How do we deal with being in an information war?
The first thing, and I've told people it's a house to house war. It's when you have people who bring you disinformation, you have to confront them immediately. And I have so many examples of that. But right now with the president we have and the sycophants around him, we probably have one of the most dangerous and incompetent administrations we've had in our country ever. And I think that's something that we have to come to grips with. It's very difficult to fight the information war when the president of the United States is the party lead for that information war. And I think, again, with the people that are watching right now, it really is about confronting every single piece of disinformation or misinformation you see, but it's also your friends and neighbors. I mean, I was just in Kentucky with somebody I really liked telling me that, tick-borne diseases were actually created by Bill Gates and believed it. So you have to confront that. And I did. And it was awkward. But I think I'm the king of awkward and I try to make it funny, but I will not let stupidity pass, especially when it comes to disinformation, because I feel like that's my job, is to actually confront every single piece of disinformation I see. And I try not to do it by being confrontational. I try to just ask them questions to see where it goes. I'm like, so has every tick-borne disease been made by Bill Gates? Well, no. So how do you know these are? What's your source, right? Okay, let's just say every single tick-borne disease is made by Bill Gates. Has there been tick-borne diseases before Bill Gates was alive? So those are the kind of things, you just ask those kind of questions, and it does make people fairly uncomfortable.
And I was really touched in reading The Breach by how this affected your family. It really caused division between yourself and your mother. I have friends who are very MAGA heavy, and it's difficult to have those conversations while maintaining the relationships, because I think I'm very fact-based, and you don't want to burn those bridges. How do you navigate that personally?
The problem that, I had with that is that I didn't want to burn a bridge, but it's blown up anyway because, you try to rebuild it, but you have something called unfalsifiable arguments. And I think that's the thing that's very difficult for me to get my arms around. For instance, and I'll tell you an unfalsifiable argument. If I say, well, listen, Donald Trump has been adjudicated for sexual offenses and is a felon, and that's my red line. I don't vote for people like that. What's the unfalsifiable argument? Well, the unfalsifiable argument is E. Jean Carroll lied, right? The jury was wrong. It was a conspiracy theory. And when you talk about why he's being, convicted of felonies and why he's been adjudicated for sexual abuse or sexual assault, it's because he has the same, he has to go through the same trials and tribulations as Jesus Christ, right? He's been ordained by God to be our leader, which I've heard from so many people. Those arguments are unfalsifiable. I can't prove, or they can't prove to me, or I can't prove to them that Jesus Christ hasn't touched, Donald Trump. And I know that sounds crazy, but to them, they've won that argument. And that's an unfalsifiable argument. And there's no facts or data that I can apply that will make them think differently, because whatever argument I have based on facts and data can immediately be rejected by a fantasy or superstition that's based on something I can't prove or disprove. And that goes back to Christopher Hitchens, right? One of the famous quotes. And, of course, You've heard of Carl Sagan, extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. What Christopher Hitchens said, right, is that you can assert without facts. I can deny without facts. And I think that's more or less, I think that's where I am very strong in my argument, is that I don't have to prove to you your extraordinary claim. You have to prove to me your extraordinary claim. And I think that's something I hope people get used to. I don't have to prove your negative. You have to prove to me your claim. And that's something I think that helps people with their arguments.
And I think that's one thing that your book really gets into with QAnon, that QAnon is at its essence there's a religious fervor to it. It is good versus evil. The people we put on the pedestal are against the pedophiles. Some of my QAnon investigations have resulted in attacks on me on Rumble, on InfoWars, about how I'm a pedophile protector. It seems like anyone anyone that they don't like is a pedophile or a pedophile protector. When QAnon is so deeply entrenched with religious views, how do we counter QAnon?
You don't. I've had so many people like, Den, we need solutions, right, to how we counter this baseline QAnon belief system. The thing is, Phil, it's so evangelical, it's so belief-based that there's going to be 30 to 35% that will always believe that. I really believe when it comes to elections in this country, sadly, I think we have this ignorance quotient that's so high right now that it's very difficult to sort of overcome that when it comes to those belief systems and people who are down that line. I mean, if you think about it, we have a UFO caucus, Phil, in the United States Congress, that with some people actually believing that there's sea bases run by aliens, right? So it's very difficult to overcome those type of arguments. What we have, though, is that maybe, Phil, people like me and you, maybe we can reach the 1% to 3% of people in each state that we can reach, right? That can be persuaded that maybe facts and data are the better way to go. But you can't do it by hate. I mean, when I was in Tennessee, there's so many great people there. And I see people wearing a Make America Great Again hat, but I try not to automatically judge. I go there and, I have my crab bake and everything like that. Taught the person they're very kind. I think what you have, though, is their belief system is so strong. As soon as you cross out of their club and they identify you as an enemy, say and I'm back to your original question, you're a Democrat, you're part of the globalist structure, right? You're evil. You're funded by George Soros. The Jews are controlling the world. There's the Illuminati, all that stuff, right? And they also believe that Bigfoot is real. They believe in UFO abductions. They believe the January 6th election was stolen. That's the issue that you have, is that you have this 30 to 35% you could never touch. I think it's the 1% to 3% that's persuadable in each state, and that's our job. I feel like that's my job. Is that 1% to 3% can change elections, and I think that's where we're at right now.
And with J6, for example, it seems like the committee, the J6 committee, was so determined to pin the culpability on Donald Trump and the people around him, which, obviously there is culpability there, but they were not willing to kind of explore these larger cultural factors. Is that correct? And why not?
It was even pushed by the committee, by the actual investigative team, saying we have to outline white nationalism and Christian nationalism as a baseline part of this. And there was a lot of fear from the committee to go after that because they were worried about alienating certain people. But there was also political pressures where people might have wanted to run for office in the future, and they thought if they put that into the actual script, that it would identify them as somebody who is going after all Christians. That's poppycock, complete poppycock. And if I get a little bit not angry, but a little strident in this, Phil, it's because we know what happened. We have the Meadows text. We did that. We have the phone records. We know it was a coup attempt. We know they talked about overthrowing the election. The very definition of that is outlined in meticulous data, texts, metadata, interviews, charging records, sentencing guidelines. And what gets me just absolutely livid is that we've certainly gotten away from the fact that this was a Christian nationalist coup attempt. And that's really what it comes down to. And those are the people that were radicalized.
And you've written about that. Matthew Taylor in The Violent Take It by Force has written about that. Do you think the public, by and large, gets that that important fact.
No. Me and you do. I think a lot of people do that see this, but the thing is, they're still going and doing their jobs, right? They still think they're just, Republican. If you're a Democrat, it's Republican dumb, right? If you're a Republican, it's Democrat evil. But what you have is we're so siloed in our information that we haven't realized, right, that there's this sort of this overarching, right, belief system that you cannot sort of penetrate. And it frustrates me that we're not able to come to grips with exactly what happened that day yet, because we still don't understand that this was a religious event. And Trump took advantage of it with the people around him.
As I explore these topics at Hate Comes to Main Street, I see Christian nationalists who, to this day, are, number one, toying with Nazism, and they are calling for an authoritarian leader, a Christian prince, some would call it. Given these forces, when you look into your crystal ball with the upcoming midterms and then the upcoming presidential election, what keeps you awake at night?
What keeps me awake is that there's so much distractions, even with conspiracy theories and superstition, even from the left, they don't even see the real issue. And the real issue is process and disenfranchisement are the way to turn elections. And that's what they did in January 6th. They're using the exact same playbook. I mean, you had Trump go out with Kristen Welker, as you saw, Phil, right? And spout the same lies about the January 6th election. And my biggest fear is that as people are saying, oh my God, they're using satellites to steal votes, they're doing the very thing to steal votes, which is to change the institutional framework for voting itself, which you saw through the SAVE Act, or you see through legislation, just like when the postmarks are actually applied to a piece of mail. That's how you do it. You disenfranchise people. You scare them, right? That's how you turn elections. That's how you steal elections in the best way I can say it, not through magical penetrations from satellites and cyber, criminals. And so I'm trying so hard to get people to see that it's right in front of you. And it scares me that the violence that could come from this might pale in comparison to January 6th, especially if you get a group who thinks that an election in a specific district is being stolen. And I've told people over and over that when you're going to start seeing this bubbling crude of awfulness is probably in late July, August, as the primaries end, and you see the real Democrat to Republican campaign starting. But it's not 2026 that worries me the most, it's 2028. And I think that's where I want people to look too, is the midterms, there's danger there. But gosh darn, Phil, the 2028 election scares the hell out of me. Not only that, is this very fact, and you look at the generic ballot, I think the Democrats think they're going to sweep. I thought that they would have, I think they would hold about 228 seats after this election, which would give them a fairly solid majority. But I'm seeing the generic ballot start to shrink. It's like a D+5 right now. I know what that means. And what you're seeing is a balancing here. And with the gerrymandering going on right now, it could be very well that the Democrats only have a 3 to 4 seat advantage. And I think it might not be as much of a blowout as people think, as you see the Democrats stumbling and bumbling, trying to figure out what their messaging is. So that's what I'm scared about, is that people really don't understand how an election is stolen. And all they got to do is look at what happened in January 6th and look at the January 6th report, read the breach. The other thing, too, is that I don't think the Democrats have solidified their message or really seen the danger of what's happening right now.
Well, and the other part of the recipe, it seems to me, is the fact that there's been a signal sent that if you try to overthrow the governmental processes, you will get a pardon.
Yeah, and I think that will happen. It's interesting, when you look at the pardons for some of the most violent recidivist criminals from January 6th, right, who've done violent crimes or been found guilty of sexual crimes against minors. Those are the people that were pardoned, many of them that stormed the Capitol. Then you see the pardons of everybody downstream, like the Mike Flynn's, right, and things of that nature, the Roger Stones. And he's going to pardon you. So he's giving you permission structures not only to try to do things that are completely nefarious against American institutions and our elections, but to engage in violence. And I think there's, when you look at when he said stand back and stand by, what was that, September of 2020, when they were talking about the Proud Boys,
Right.
when he gave that, that exhortation to the Proud Boys, I think the $1.776 billion weaponization fund was his much larger stand back and stand by for the 2026 and 2028 elections. And I've been telling the danger, Phil, on that for so long. And it's the exact same playbook. And it just exhausts me. I've said it for the last year. And sometimes I feel like I'm sort of yelling into a popcorn box, my friend.
Well, you and I were talking before we went live, and I, admitted, hate comes to Main Street is not the most positive title you could have. So help me find some hope. Let's end on hope. Where do you see hope?
I've probably been Denver downer for a long time. I've been pretty pessimistic, my friend, but I do have hope. And the hope is that we've been through awful things before as Americans. I had hope today in a weird way. I had hope because I saw that Democrats and Republicans now self-identify at only 53% of the electorate. 47% total are independent, right? They're starting to self-identify, seeing what's happening, right? That we have these corporate structures that pit each other against each other. Now, again, I'm not saying that Democrats are as bad as the Republicans right now. I hope people are listening to what I'm saying. I hope they're being able to compartment this. What I'm saying is that I think Americans will start to see that the parties, what they're being sold, isn't about them. It's about the parties and them staying in power, whatever they have to do. This two-party system has contributed to almost a $40 trillion debt. This two-party system has contributed to the dysfunction we've seen. And it's allowed one party to completely try to destroy everything we value as Americans. The hope I see is we've come through this before. And I think the hope is I'm seeing people who've never run for office before stand up. And Phil, I am definitely starting an exploratory committee. I told somebody a year ago, I would rather self-immolate than run for office again. I said, just pour gas on me and I'll jump off a building while I'm on fire. That's how I feel about politics. But I think the people who hate it, the people who but know how it works, I think they got to get back in, even though I'm going to take massive punishment from the left and right. And I know I will. But you know what? I think maybe my grandkids are more important than me. I think maybe my kids are more important than me. I think my wife's more important than me. I think, Phil, you're more important. I think you're more important than me. I think Americans will come to their senses. And it's not a great plan. Hope is not a viable course of action. All the military sayings I have, right? Hope is not a plan. But damn, I don't know, the last week or so, last 2 weeks, I'm looking around. I'm like, you know what? Maybe we got a chance here. And I think maybe we do if the right people step up.
Yeah, I had a post this week about how last week was a pretty tough week for me, just, having all the hate, thrown back in my face. But then a woman from Belfast messaged me, and she was like, people here in Northern Ireland really appreciate what you're doing. And she sent me photos from the anti-racism rally that they had outside the Belfast City Hall. And so I think we just have to look for the hope wherever it presents itself.
Well, Phil, you're defined by your enemies, as I am. And if the enemies that I've seen of you defined you, you're one of the best men that I've seen out there doing the right thing. And I definitely wanted to do this interview to tell you in front of all these people on Substack that are listening that you're a hell of a guy. And I love tough guys. And Phil, I got to tell you, from what I've seen, from what you've had to endure, and the people who hated you or send you death threats, or the people who tried to overwhelm you on Facebook, if those are the people against you, man, I got your six anytime. We're shoulder to shoulder, buddy. I just want to let you know that.
I appreciate that. Where can people find you?
I'm pretty simple, man. Denver Riggleman is literally my Substack. Denver Riggleman is my blue sky. Now on X, I'm not there as much anymore, but it's Denver, the number 4, VA for Virginia on Twitter. So that's it. I'm not a very complicated man when it comes to my Twitter and my Blue Sky, my Substack handles. That's where they can find me. Obviously, my book's still out there. Nobody has to buy the book, but if you go to the library, they got them. It did okay. I think right now, I do think The Breach, and I never thought I would say this, and because I've tried to be humble about it, I think it is the book on the structure or the planning of how to coup in the American sort of experiment and how to undermine institutions. And I think they're going to use that same playbook in a much more robust way. So anyhow, there you go, buddy.
Well, I'm going to add it to the hatecomestomainstreet.com bookstore. It's
Thank you.
incredible to finally meet you face to face, and look forward to maybe sipping a bourbon with you at some point in the future, and doing this again as well.
Phil, you will never buy a bourbon if you're with me, my friend. I promise you that.
Well, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to talking again.
Yes, sir. Anytime, Phil. You call me anytime, my friend. Take care, buddy. And I think, Phil, you just got to, I think